Good morning, people of the world. It's your boy Living Proof. Happy Friday out there. I just want to come on to give y'all a quick message of the day and the Bible verse of the day. The Bible verse of the day comes from 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. And it states that, God doesn't see things how man see things. Man, see things by appearance, but God see things, he sees the heart. And that verse, it had me thinking about this story in the Bible, in John chapter 4, about the woman at the well. Some of y'all may know the story about the woman at the well, how Jesus was, on the road, and he stopped at this town, Samaria. He was tired, and, he was, thirsty. So this Samaritan woman came out to draw water from the well. And Jesus asked her, can you give me a sip of, the water? So the woman was kind of, surprised that Jesus was, talking to her, because, Jesus was a Jew. And, Jews in Samaria, they have their, disagreement for certain reason. So the woman was surprised. She was like, this well, came from our forefather Jacob. It was given to his son Joseph. So Jesus was like, yeah, I know that. But, you should be, it's, think about the gift of God and, who's asking you for this, drink of water. So she was like, oh, okay. So she was like, I'll give you living water, some, and she was like, how you gonna give me water? You don't got no bucket to, get any water from this well. So you talk about this living water. And Jesus was like, yeah, I give you the living water, because, water from this well, you're going to always, be thirsty, but the living water that I give you is you'll never thirst again. So the woman was like, she was like, that sounds good. Yeah, I want that living water. So Jesus was like, go get your husband. So the woman's like, I don't have a husband. Jesus was like, right, you had 5 husbands, and the man that you with right now, it's not your husband. So she was like, who is this guy? Like, how you know that? So she was kind of like shocked. Was like, okay, you must be, a prophet. And then she was like, okay, since you know everything, Jesus, then tell me why do you Jews think that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, and then the Samaria thinks that, the Mount of, I forgot what it's called, the Gezi, something like that. It's the only place of worship for the Samaria. Jesus was like, man, they tripping, man. Because the time will come, like, you don't even got to go nowhere to worship, God the Father. You could be right here and you can worship God the Father, because God is, looking for those types of worship, from people, that, they worship him in spirit and truth. So, that's a little recap of that story. But, the message that I got from that story that stands out to me was about relationships. The woman at the well, she was thirsty for a relationship. She'd been in several different relationships in the past, and she was in a relationship right now, but 5 different relationships, you can tell like something went wrong, something wasn't satisfying to that woman or the partner. So she went to another relationship, got into another relationship, and then the person she with, she probably wasn't satisfied there. She was thirsty for more. So Jesus was like, so pretty much that story is about relationship, and then God desire relationships with each and every one of us. He desired true relationship. It's not about going to church or going to seek a priest in the Catholic Church or whatever, or a bishop or a rabbi or any of those to seek a relationship with God. God desires a relationship with each and every one of us individually. So that's what Jesus was, telling the woman, like, what you desire, it can't be filled with, getting in many different relationships with other people, because what you desire all along and what void you're trying to fill is a void that was only fit for God, that desire for God. So, more of the story, and then, Jesus went on to say, like, how he, like, he was like, yeah, if you've been married, like Jesus said in his word, like, if anyone divorces after being married, you are adulterer. And then if you, in a relationship and, have, sex outside of marriage, that's a fornicator. So pretty much Jesus was like, yeah, I know you were, adulterer and you a fornicator, but, I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is your heart. What I see is what you longing for is, something that, human relationship can't fulfill in you. So that's why I'm here now talking to you, because, I know what you desire. I'm looking at your heart. You desire, a really genuine relationship with God, because the statement she made was like, after that, she was like, okay, why do, they said Jews, Jerusalem is the only place of worship for God, and, Samaritan is, Mount Gerizim is the only place. So that statement for that woman, she wanted, to worship God, but she was confused, like, hold on, where does she got to go to worship God? So that's, that was another spirit of, confusion and doubt. So to fulfill her, happiness, she was getting in and out relationships, and, that wasn't fulfilling anything until she met Jesus. When she met Jesus, it was like, man, this is, whom I long for. And, I gotta go back and tell my city about this, because, he know everything about me and nobody else knew. God knows everything about us. Nobody else know. We can have a lot of hidden secret, but only God would know what's in our heart. You see what I'm saying? So she went back to tell her town, like, yo, can this be the Messiah, that is to come? Because, he told me everything about me that nobody else knew but God himself. So, so she told the people in her town, and so the people was asking Jesus, like, can you stay for, a couple of days so we can hear, your message? Jesus agreed, and he stayed two days. After, his 2 days, ministering to him, the people of the town was like, they said, we believe in him not because of what the woman was telling us. We heard it for ourselves. We heard him for ourselves. We heard his voice for ourselves. And we believe that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, the Savior of the world. We believe it for ourselves. So you know, the moral of that story is about, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, about how many relationships you've been in. All that doesn't matter. Only God can fill your void that was meant for him. You know, we try to fill a void with things of this world, and Jesus' life, we're going to always be thirsty and hungry more, but never satisfied, you know, inside. We satisfy, you know, the outside, you know, the flesh, but the inside will never be satisfied, will never be fulfilled if we don't accept Jesus Christ, the living water. If we don't desire a true relationship with God, a relationship, you know, with spirit and in truth. Because God is spirit, and those that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. In the book of Hebrews, it also talks about it is impossible to please God according to the flesh. It's impossible to please God. If we seeking to please God by, you know, acting according to our flesh, you know, thinking fleshly thoughts, you know, thinking about, you know, this is what God desires, you know, walking and thinking according to the flesh, it's impossible to please God that way, you know. The flesh and the spirit is always at war. You know, read in the book of one of those books in the Bible talks about the works of the flesh and the works of the fruit of the spirit. You know, those is always, you know, intimate against one another. So yeah, that's a quick message that I want to, you know, share today. It's about only God can fulfill that void in your heart, in your spirit. You know, stop, you know, seeking relationship after relationships to satisfy that void, because you're always going to end up hurt, you know. And Jesus, like, you know, woman, you've been through enough suffering, you've been through enough hurt. You know, it's a time to accept what I have to offer you, because I see you've been through enough, you know. And, you know, we have to, you know, admit that, you know, we've been through enough. You know, we've been in and out of relationships, many different types of relationships. You know, it's all forms of relationship out here, you know. But when we never satisfy, you know, we always end up hurt, feeling down, feeling like you the problem in these relationships, when you're fulfilling it with the wrong thing. You're filling the void that was only meant for God. So, you know, this is your boy Living Proof. You know, I'm about to finish these laps and, you know, get my day started. But God bless you all. Jesus willing to, you know, accept you all if you open up your heart to him, you know. So it's your boy Living Proof. We up and out. Peace.